Okay.
I think we're just about to go live. All right, looks like we're live. Hello and good morning, everybody, and early afternoon here. We want to welcome you to episode number 33 of Mythic Mission, which we've called Mama and Papa Bears Unite. We have an interview with Amy Davison of Mama Bear Apologetics today. So I'm excited, even though I'm sick and it's not my ideal condition for doing a podcast. I'm joined by my co-host and my best friend and wife, Sarah, today. So that's exciting. We do have different schedules and we're often not able to record these simultaneously together, but we're hoping to do more of these in the future. So look forward to more of Mike and Sarah. So we're looking forward to doing that. And as always, excuse me, find out more about us in our podcast and our ministry, what we're doing at www.mythicmission.com. Please don't forget to subscribe. We have a YouTube channel, but we also have, every podcast platform imaginable. So wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it's Spotify or iTunes or Anchor or Podbean or whatever they are, we're on them. So want to introduce our guest for today. And then we have a set of questions that are going to cover this book that we're talking about today, which I'm going to tell you about in just a second. And towards the end of the show, we want to encourage you to pick up the book. So we'll talk about where you can get it. And Amy can tell us about some resources that maybe she can point you to learn more in addition to getting the book for yourself. So let me introduce Amy Davison, who is a former Air Force veteran turned writer and podcast co-host for Mama Bear Apologetics. She received her MA in Christian apologetics from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary and loves helping parents raise their children to be warriors in the faith. She specializes in biblical sexuality, how to incorporate apologetics into parenting, and cultural challenges to the faith. Amy is co-author of Mama Bear Apologetics Guide to Sexuality with Hillary Morgan Ferrer, who we're missing today. Hope she feels better soon, and we'll be discussing this book. So Amy, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. And I think it's cool that you guys are a husband and wife team. I'm also married to a Michael, so so good choice. Good choice.
He's cool already. He's cool already.
Well, I'm excited to be here too, and interviewing. Obviously, my Michael has done this a lot more than I have, so appreciate everyone bearing with me as I go through this interview. But I'm actually going to start us off with the questions. I'm wondering if you can tell us why you and Hillary wanted to write this book now. Why is it so timely?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, if there's one thing that is really hitting in culture right now, it is just all these sexual issues, and not just geared toward parents. There's been, or adults per se, there's been a huge shift in the active evangelism of children nowadays. And I think it's caught parents off guard by how quickly it has taken place and how prevalent it is. I know for me, and the story is covered in our book, it came to my attention when I was watching cartoons with my son a few years ago. We were just trying to survive the Texas heat, which is a struggle every year. And we were just zoning out watching some Nickelodeon. And here is this kid's cartoon, and it introduced bisexuality among childhood characters. So children characters were having bisexual leanings, and my son, he saw it, and it was so fast. If I had been on Pinterest or goofing off on my phone, I totally would have missed it. And I saw it, my son saw it, and he goes, "Wait a second, Mom, but just a few episodes earlier, she liked a boy. What happened?" And it was like, oh my gosh, here it was right here in my living room. And I had no idea how to address it. And so fast forward a year or so, and Harvest House had approached Hillary and asked for this book, because this book, there wasn't one out there yet geared directly toward parents. And she had a lot of reservations, because again, this is one of the biggest topics that are out there now. I mean, if you want to go kick a bee's nest, this is what to talk about. Mm-hmm. And so she had reservations for a while, but over time, God worked on her heart, and she was like, you know what, we need to write this. And so pretty much all of our COVID year, that 2020, when everybody was in lockdown, we were in lockdown too, but it was devoted toward this ministry on equipping parents to understand the ideologies behind a lot of these movements, helping them understand what's going on in culture right now, so that way they could be better equipped, especially than I was a few years ago, on how to talk to their kids about these issues, because it's not something that we can wait till, middle school. I think when we were kids, right, you get the sort of talk in elementary school where the boys and girls are separated. And then maybe middle school, you go through the 7th grade health class. That's super awkward. And then you're done. And nowadays you can't, because it's in Bubble Guppies. It's in Blue's Clues. And so we have to actively be talking to our kids because the world is already doing it for us.
It's in Blue's Clues? Really? Wow.
Yes. Yeah. They had drag queens on Blue's Clues.
Ah, okay. You learn something new every day. Well, thank you. Yeah, so much. And it's clearly a timely book. So this is probably a perfect segue for me to ask question number 2. So here on Mythic Mission, we kind of founded the podcast ministry to talk a lot about myth and worldview and how these concepts overlap. So we usually tend to define myth as narrated worldview. We know it's a loaded term. You guys talk a lot about worldview in the early chapters of your book, which we love, by the way. So for those that, and I think a lot of people will know this, but there will be some who are listening who don't. What is a worldview? You don't have to talk about myth if you don't want to, but if you want to incorporate it, it's fine. But what is a worldview? How do you guys talk about it in the book? And what do you want our audience to take away from that concept?
Yeah, absolutely. So worldview is something that is so needed in the church. Like, we need to be actively teaching what a worldview is, because I think so many of us were raised with the assumption of a biblical worldview. So what I mean by that is, if you have grown up in private school, homeschool, or in church, a lot of these worldview things, when we're talking about core questions of the faith, like how do we know anything exists? Does God exist? Well, who is a human being? These are huge questions that every worldview has to answer. But under Christianity, especially if you've grown up within Christian culture, these topics are sort of assumed, to where there's not active engagement on what these are, how can we recognize them in other worldviews, and what are the implications of these questions to our daily lives. So these kids are growing up under these assumptions, and then when they go off to college, now they're facing a lot of postmodernism influences on whether or not truth exists, which under postmodernism it doesn't. You have your truth, I have my truth, somebody else has their truth, and all of that's totally okay. They're all equally valid, which is totally just logically unsound. But kids don't recognize it, and they completely buy into it, to where you have kids that have brought up under this sort of Christian bubble, and then when they go off, they don't see how their bubble, so to speak, is any more viable than the other person's. And I noticed this most tragically when I was substituting at a Christian private school. They had an apologetics class for their 12th graders, and it was only one semester long. That's all they got throughout the whole year. And they were given the task of, how would they evangelize their friends? How would they share the gospel with their friends? So they were paired off, and they were given 15 minutes to write down a very short gospel message. And so, I'm watching them, everything, 15 minutes is up. I was like, okay, guys, what you got? Nobody had written anything. I was like, was it me? Did I not explain things properly? And they go, well, no, Miss Amy, I realize that this is my truth, but they have their truth, and that's okay, right? And these were 12th graders who had been brought up in Awanas, Sunday school, private school. And here they are, the very last semester of their senior year, and they had no idea of the existence of truth, let alone how to convey it to their friends. And I was like, okay, well, we stopped the class and discussed truth right there, but it just exposes the drastic need of just worldview engagement within our culture, especially in regards to sexuality. So a worldview, again, like we said, it's not only answering all these questions, but it also forms a framework, a lens, so to speak, of how we see the world, how we interpret information. It acts a lot like a filter as well, to where depending on what worldview you have, if everybody knows what a filter is, right? It's supposed to keep things out and let certain things through. However, if you have a wrong filter, you could be letting in the wrong things while keeping out the truth. And so it's important for kids to be taught, okay, this is what a worldview is. This is what the biblical worldview says. Here's how we can recognize it, the importance, especially, of truth. In fact, I would say, with regards to worldview teaching, you have to start with the existence of truth first before you even go into worldview. Because if they don't understand that truth exists, then your worldview, again, is just another preference. Right. So with this book, we actually talk about the biblical worldview, what it is, how sex actually communicates God's design, and I think it's no accident that when you look at God's original design, one man, one woman joined together, and how you have children being capable of that of that union. It's very symbolic of how Christ and the church are supposed to be joined together, and only in joining through him do we have flourishing. So here you have this children as the symbolic, sort of the symbolism of flourishing that can only come from a man and a woman. So we also see it's just Christ and the church. This is how we have this union, and it's mirrored in sexuality. And so it's so important for children to understand that, because other worldviews, what they do with sex is either elevated to the role of God, to where we're almost worshiping it, so to speak, or we become gods, or it's completely devalued as some sort of carnal act, like we are no better than animals. So it's so important, again, to be not only be teaching kids from a biblical worldview, but first we need to teach them what a biblical worldview is, which we do in the book, and then how sexuality actually communicates this worldview, not only of, the purpose of sex, the design of our bodies, how it nurtures a husband and wife, as well as flourishes love between them and their children, but also how it's symbolic of God's relationship to the church. Because once we fully understand that, then sex is brought into its proper perspective of this is something beautiful and cherished. And you could see why God says it's only to be within marriage, because that is how his union and his beauty is only seen. It's him plus his people together forever. And that is how it's supposed to be. So again, it's so important, but so many of us and most adults, I don't think we were brought up and taught this way. And so in a way, we're seeing this sort of revival, this apologetic revival in the church, and it's fantastic. We need it. But unfortunately, we're playing a lot of catch up. So yes, it's so important. I hope I haven't rambled too much, but it's so important and vital within parenting as well as in the health of the church.
Not at all. Ramble on more like that. That's great. That's exactly what you're here for, and we appreciate it. It's really, really great. Sarah, I know you have the next two questions, and Amy started to touch on that. So she's going to, I'm sure, have some really great things to share. I just wanted to say one thing, and Sarah, help me out with this too, because I'll come home from teaching my college kids, and just yesterday we were talking about, I know Ken Samples, in one of his books distinguishes between social pluralism and religious pluralism, freedom of diverse expression of religious beliefs versus all religions are equally valid and simultaneously true. And we were discussing the differences, and all throughout the semester, I just noticed so many students who persisted in thinking truth is just something we own on our own. We define it for ourselves, and by the end of the semester, I usually see a few minds that, kind of turn because I've looked at the logic of it. And of course, if they don't, that's their choice. It obviously saddens me sometimes. But one thing that I just noticed, and a few authors have picked up on this, is they'll just shrug their shoulders. I had a few with their most recent discussion kind of say, well, I still believe, all religions are equally true and valid, even though it's contradictory. And even knowing that it doesn't make sense, it's kind of like a shoulder shrug, like, well, who cares? I'm embracing the illogical nature of it. And that apathy, or I don't know what it is, but that really bothers me. I don't know how to address that.
No, and I think you touched on it perfectly. It is. It's almost an intellectual apathy, and almost an abandonment of intellectual integrity. Like if we are truly seeking after truth, and we're going to follow truth wherever it leads. However, if it leads contrary to what they're wanting, they have to just kind of abandon that conclusion and be like, okay, well, yeah, that may be true, but I'm just not going to go there. Right. And I think a lot of that is almost social conditioning to an extent, because here we have such a huge influence within social media to where if you do not go along with sort of the group think that's out there right now, then you can be canceled, you can lose your job. I mean, it is so aggressive now. And then people have also bought into this lie that if they do not affirm, endorse, approve of any sort of expression that their friends may have, then they are somehow being unloving. So it's like they can't reconcile the truth of faith and also being truthful and accountable to their friends and family. They don't know how to do that. So they have to abandon one. And so often it's the gospel that gets abandoned because again, if they're going to be out and with their friends and everything, they feel that pressure, that discomfort, and they want to avoid that. So it's just easier to concede the gospel emotionally and intellectually for them than it is to stand firm and actually shine a light. They don't know how to navigate it. It's sad.
The struggle is real, and
the struggle is real. I know, right? It needs to be on your shirt that you wear to class.
It really does. It really does. Well, Sarah, I know you want to ask the next couple of questions. I know they kind of overlap. So when you're ready, go take it away.
Well, I think too, just on top of what you guys were just saying, I think part of this comes from our culture's understanding of tolerance versus what real biblical tolerance is too. And I think the pressure for kids, especially in this day and age with social media, and from younger and younger, the pressure to fit in or to seem like you're not the intolerant one. It's just
Yes.
so to be tolerant is to accept everybody's beliefs as truth. Otherwise, you're going to be seen as intolerant or, like you said, canceled, you know?
Mhm.
So, and that's part of the problem too. But you were kind of touching on this already, talking about how we need to be explicit about teaching our kids about the Christian worldview, that they're not getting it. Even you were in a private school knowing that they weren't getting what they needed as 12th graders. So how can parents accurately teach kids a Christian worldview, and how young can we start, do you think?
I think the age of the child, you really have to, it depends on what they're being exposed to. So like I had mentioned earlier, when you think of things like Bubble Guppies and Blue's Clues and Sesame Street, they are actively marketing a progressive sexual ethic to kids from very young age. I mean, we're talking what, 2 years old, 3 years old. Now, of course, a 2-year-old isn't going to be capable of philosophical reasoning. And actually, that's kind of their goal. Again, it's desensitization and normalization. They don't want it to seem as odd, because then if something can be desensitized and normalized, these aren't necessarily bad things, but they can be if you jump to the conclusion of, okay, well, if I see it regularly and it doesn't shock me, then it must be normal, good. Once you start importing, these ethical terms, and they're like, oh, okay, now we're making this moral conclusion that this is okay. That's where the problem lies. Unfortunately, that's a lot of the agenda. So there was a psychologist that commented on the Family Day episode of Sesame Street. And excuse me, I'm also getting over a cold myself. So that episode aired this June, and it was introducing different types of families. And so a same-sex male couple was introduced with their daughter, and it was done very neutrally. It's just, oh, do you like to cook with your family? So do I. Do you like to dance with your family? So do I. All of these common ground things that, okay, yes, those exist. That type of family exists. You like to cook? No problem. Well, the philosopher the psychologist who was commenting on it, she said, oh my gosh, this is so great. This is awesome that we're getting it to kids this young, because kids this young are so accepting. It won't register to them. It's only when they're taught later that they will start adopting the biases of, their parents or the culture around them. So what this psychologist was actually praising was the fact that children are young and impressionable. Yes, we can agree. And it's actually good to get them young, because if they can get them young, most parents aren't talking to their kids. Most parents aren't equipping their kids to discern a worldview at all. So this is awesome, because then we can get them while they're young and we can start building this foundation. And when you think of cartoons like this, and it's not just Bubble Guppies, that sort. I mean, when you think of Loud House, Craig of the Creek, pretty much anything on Nickelodeon, Disney, Pixar shorts right now are very actively promoting a progressive sexual worldview. It's grooming them all the way up until, middle school, high school. And then, gosh, think of the music that's out there right now. So they're just constantly being fed. And this foundation of a progressive sexual ethic is being built and built. And now we're trying to jump in maybe middle school when we start talking. And here there's been 9 to 12 years of a foundation that's already being laid. I mean, I'm not saying it's something we can't do. God has done bigger things, but it's a lot harder to jackhammer through a foundation than to build one on fresh soil. So it's so important for us to recognize where our kids are at and then start talking to them young from a young age. So again, one thing that I recommend for parents that's super easy to do is to watch the cartoons that your kids are watching with them. Now, of course, that's not always possible, right? Because, we got to cook dinner, we got to fold laundry, that sort of thing. But you at least need to be scrolling through and seeing the descriptions of the episodes that you're watching, or do a quick IMDb search on the cartoon. So we actually put out a little blurb on Mama Bear, and we asked the moms, hey, if you've been watching cartoons with your kids, what cartoons have you seen that have, alternative sexual worldviews in them? And within 1 hour, we had 150 comments. I mean, we were just floored. So it's one of those things to where there's some parents that are like, okay, well, how can we keep our kids away from it? And I just have to be real. You can't keep your kids away from it. And that's not what we were called to do. There's a great quote that said, we are not called to child-proof the world, but to world-proof the child. And so that's the approach that we need to be taking, is world-proofing our child. So again, start young with the little ones. You're going to want to start teaching about anatomy, discussions of marriage, even things like healthy relationships, safe touch, all of these normal things that you would teach with the younger kiddos. Then you're going to want to be looking into, if you're putting your child in public school, what are they actually teaching at the public school, which is a simple thing of all you have to go to is your county ISD office and ask them, your school district office, and ask them to see the curriculum that they're teaching. And they legally cannot keep you from it. You can see the curriculum, you can see the books. Now that's not foolproof, because again, if a teacher decides to bring in a book last minute, or there's a discussion that happens in class, we can't keep it all out, right? So the importance is to helping your child navigate it in the situation. So asking them what they're teaching, and then addressing those issues as they come. The goal is to be both proactive and reactive, because again, we're not omnipresent, we're not omniscient, we're not going to be able to see and know everything that's going to come out to your kids. So probably the best thing that we can do as parents is to help solidify the fact that we can be a source of information for our kiddos. So we do not want there to be any taboos in the house. If you, kiddo, want to ask a question, then you know what, you're ready for the answer.
Yeah.
And so it's just a great way, a proactive approach that we can tell our kids, be like, baby, if you hear something on the bus, if your friends have told you something. There was one gal that we were interviewing with who her daughter found out about LGBTQ lifestyles and the Women's March through a library book. She was 8 years old. She got a library book of a modern retelling of Little Women, which, and I love Little Women. I love Louisa May Alcott. This would not have even registered on my radar to flip through it and see what's there, because I'm like, it's Little Women. Well, no, because it's a modern retelling. They took it to the modern age and they made Jo a lesbian. And then she goes and marches in the gay march. And here her 8-year-old daughter found out about that. And mom was, again, scrambling. It's that we have to be reactive. So, but what's great is she asked her mom.
Yes.
So that's probably our biggest goal with our kiddos, is be like, if you hear something, if you see something, if something you're not quite sure about, ask me. Mom and dad are here for you. We're not omniscient. That's such a huge blessing. That's not one of the spiritual gifts, is omniscience. That's only for the Lord. So it's like, if I can't get you the answer, I'm going to find somebody, or I'm going to find a resource that can help equip you. So that's what we're wanting to do with our kiddos, is say, if you've got a question, go ahead and come to me, whatever it is, doesn't matter. You may, now, full warning, kids are really great about asking great questions at terrible times. Sometimes my guys are notorious. We'll be like in the middle of a crowded Target aisle and they'll bust out with something. And I'm like, baby, that's a great question. You know what? Instead of freaking out the old lady down the aisle, let's wait till we're driving home and we will discuss it. So you will have to tailor it to their age, to the location. Again, if you're at grandma's for Sunday dinner, may not be the greatest time for discussion, but then get back and follow up with your kiddos. So we talk about in the book how to teach from a biblical worldview. It's recognizing those worldview questions on truth, morality, which is, again, so important nowadays. And then also comparing it to the other worldviews out there, because one thing we want to do is make sure that our kids see us accurately and fairly representing other worldviews. So that's one thing that right? When you look at media, and every time, my kids have picked up on this too, every time a Christian character is introduced, they are so ridiculous. Like, they're super over the top, very intense. They're either really frumpy, or they're just kind of like this airhead Jesus character, to where I've got a 14-year-old, and I think we were starting to watch A Fault in Their Stars, and he was just like, oh man, here's the Jesus character with his big Jesus rug, and they recognize that Christians aren't portrayed very fairly in culture. However, culture does reflect what it believes Christians to be. So we need to actively be counter to that. So being that great representation of, okay, let's see what this other worldview says. Instead of freaking out, it's nope, let's engage it. Because that is the whole reason God gave us spiritual armor in Ephesians 6, was not to avoid the argument or to freak out, but to know how to wield these tools effectively, and to teach our kids how to wield these tools effectively.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to be listening back to this a couple times. I loved, I just have to say, I love the world proofing. Did I get it right? World proofing your child. That's so great. Sarah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I think I was going to say the same thing. I think that, sometimes as parents, our tendency is to want to kind of shelter our kids from what's out there. And we realize we really are doing a disservice to them by that, and then being able to have those conversations with them, as tough as they are, is going to infinitely be better for them in the long run than just trying to avoid and put it off, and having them learn from a book or a kid on the bus. And I actually teach fifth graders. So I know some of the things that they're talking about at school that, in my mind, I'm like, never in fifth grade, I didn't even know about some of the stuff that they're talking about. So, just being prepared that they're going to be exposed to it, and it's younger and younger they're getting exposed to things, and so being able to navigate that as parents is, I think, very, very important. And it kind of leads into the next question you kind of touched on a little bit as well about the Christian view of sex, gender, and sexuality. You were touching on that and how it reflects God's design. But so how does the Christian worldview affect the way we view sexuality? Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so the Christian worldview is fantastic because it elevates the human person, most of all within this. So when you look at other worldviews, human beings especially are completely degraded. We become these carnal beings. We become objects for another person's desire, and that's one thing that's absolutely so tragic, especially within this movement right now that's called sex positivity. It's actually a lot of third wave feminism. It's just been sort of rebranded a bit, and even during the early turn of the 20th century, it was this whole sexual revolution, and now we're just seeing it, like I said, rebranded to where it sounds really good. I mean, sex is good, positivity is good, smash them together, obviously we're going to have a good thing, right? No, not at all. Sex positivity basically says that any sexual expression that you want to do is fine as long as consent and pleasure are your guide. So when we think of a worldview, right, worldview has to account for truth and morality. So within sex positivity, truth and morality is consent and pleasure, but these are deeply problematic because, for one, you can consent to all sorts of awful things, and you can get pleasure from all sorts of awful things. We have jails filled with people who have done just that. That doesn't make something moral. However, when we offer a design that's contrary to God's design, you leave this God vacancy, and so you have to fill it with something. And so often that is filled with yourself, the human being, which is why we see this idea of pleasure. Things contrary to God's design. Oh, sorry, heard a bit of an echo.
Yeah,
no, that's okay.
So sorry.
No, that's okay. But so there comes this God vacancy that has to be filled, and it's always filled with ourself, and it's usually consent and pleasure. And Nadia Bolz-Weber, she actually writes in her book Shameless that kindness also should be included in there, and she incorporates kindness in there because, again, she's trying to alleviate any opportunity for potential oppression or abuse that can occur. But again, kindness also doesn't factor in, because you could have two consenting adults who get mutual pleasure, but that doesn't mean that what they're getting pleasure in or what they're consenting to is ultimately good. So it's hugely problematic. And we actually see it in all of its brokenness in Romans 1, starting in 17 through 32. And how it starts is this progression into sexual sin. It never starts with an action. It always starts in the mind. It talks about how the people, they knew God, they knew his creation, they saw it, and they rejected it. And because they actively rejected and turned away from God, their thoughts were blinded and fogged, and their hearts were darkened. And once that occurred, once the mental blindness occurred, then they consented to degrading themselves. They had to put up idols of their own making, of created things in themselves. So here we have this God vacancy, and they're filling it with themselves and created beings, which, again, when we see sexuality and how it's articulated in culture, it's always these sort of carnal, you got to get your urges and meet these needs and that sort of thing. And then it actually ends up degrading further to incorporating all sorts of things, anger, malice. And at the very end of it, you see that they not only participated in these actions, but they actively encouraged others to engage with them also. So they're encouraging other people to go along with this. So it's this huge cycle of brokenness that we see, that once you deviate from God's design, there's no way to get this sort of beautiful flourishing that we see only within the Christian worldview. And that's why it's so important to teach both of them. And your mythic mission, in pointing to especially literature and how we can see this, there's two places where we can see this. The first is Pinocchio, the 1940s Pinocchio. And so this movie is great. God brought this to my mind when I was giving a talk on hookup culture to teens. And it's the scene in Pinocchio to where he's in the wagon and he's going off with Lampwick, and they're going to go to Pleasure Island, and they're so excited. And here Lampwick is talking about, oh, Pleasure Island's absolutely great. You can do whatever you want. There's no parents. There's no one to tell you no. And he's talking it up to Pinocchio, and Pinocchio's like, oh my gosh, this is going to be awesome. It's called Pleasure Island after all. Of course it's going to end great. And so they get on the barge, and the whole time they're traveling, you have this evil wagon master. And when it's focused on his face, he seems like this jolly guy. He looks like Santa without a beard. only his face morphs and contorts into this demonic evil smile. And here the boys are unloaded onto Pleasure Island. And as they're tearing off to go break windows and eat food and smoke cigars, because I mean, what 9-year-old doesn't want to smoke a cigar? And you see him with these shadowy figures, and he goes, lock the gates so no one can escape. And here they are shutting the gates. And as these boys relish in these activities that were promised to bring them the ultimate joy and the ultimate fulfillment, they see they're losing their humanity, and they start morphing into these donkeys, and they're dropped off out of the chute and to be loaded up into slavery. And there's one donkey who he's not quite fully transformed. He's physically a donkey, but he can still talk. And he's just begging. He goes, Mama, Mama, I just want my mama. And the wagon master picks him up and he goes, you've had your fun. Now it's time to pay. And he throws him aside. And it's just this horrible picture of this is what true sexual brokenness looks like. Because if you think back to the beginning of the scene, who is pulling the wagon? It isn't horses, it's donkeys. It's the children that used to be children that were lured off. And that is what we're seeing. And it's in this movie. And yeah, I know. I get chills every time I talk about it, because it breaks my heart, because at that talk, there was a girl that came up to me and she said, I didn't know I had value. She had fallen into hookup culture, and to where she was just making connections on these Tinder apps and things, just to try and meet someone to have this little bit of connection, because it made her feel like she was loved for just a moment, and then they would leave. And she just felt broken and worthless. And she goes, I never knew I had value until I heard the gospel. And she was like 17. And my heart just broke for her, because it was just this visual example of this awfulness of this story. But what's so great about Jesus is that, you know, we are those donkeys who are crying out, just save me, save me. And instead, when the wagon master's saying, you know, you have to pay, Jesus comes back and he goes, no, I've already paid. And he comes and rescues. And so you see that in Pinocchio most beautifully. And then Chronicles of Narnia, the newest one that just came out, you know, you talked about how for parents, it can be a little intimidating to talk about these issues with our kids. And what we need to recognize is that our children are in the battlefield. In fact, one of the negative comments I've heard about Chronicles of Narnia, ironically, is why would C.S. Lewis think it's appropriate to give children weapons? And the response I read in the comments that I thought was perfect is, well, why would you not think that a child doesn't need weapons when they're actually in the battlefield? And that's where they're at. And you see it with Lucy and Edmund. They both entered Narnia with no knowledge of what was in front of them. They were caught up in the beauty of it. And here you have Lucy, who was told by Mr. Tumnus to watch out, to be careful. While there's beauty, there's also great wickedness and danger. Even some of the trees are on her side. And so she was equipped from the beginning to recognize that there was brokenness and there was danger, whereas Edmund was not. In fact, he was lured away by the beautiful queen with promises that he was going to be a prince and he was going to be incredible and have power and rule and dominion. He was promised all these great things, but they were ultimately lies. And what was it easier to do? It was easier to train Lucy than it was to rescue Edmund. So that is our goal as parents, is to train Lucy's. Rescuing Edmund is definitely possible. Through Christ, all things are possible, but it's easier to train. So I'm sorry if I got off track of the original question. Feel free to steer me back, but I just thought of it from you guys and your mission. So
thank you for tying that in. No, we've talked a lot about, you know, I wrote a book on Tolkien's universe and had a lot of Lewis in there. So it's very relevant. I'm still mind blown about the whole Pinocchio example, but I just wanted to say, earlier we had some people commenting, so I'm so sorry about that interruption, but
no, you're good.
People are asking questions and making comments, so I want to take a look at that in a minute, Sarah. I know it's still your question, but I'm just thinking of one more example here. I almost had it. There it is. Okay, I thought I almost lost it. Percy Jackson. Have you ever read those stories?
Okay. No, I haven't, but I've heard good things.
Yeah, I only read, I think, into book 2. I'm trying to remember where I stopped, and there's spin-offs of spin-offs. And I remember the first book, Sarah, I feel like you read it too, with the, from the Odyssey, it's the Lotus Eaters, but I think there's like a Lotus hotel they go to, and it kind of is the same, almost Pinocchio scenario, where they're trapped there and they're having fun. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I don't know if I've read the book, but from the movie, I remember the scene where they're given like drinks that kind of, they just wrapped up in this, like, we're having so much fun, and they don't realize like there's like a lot of time passing or something like that, right? Where it's just they're like just kind of that same experience of like a pleasure island kind of thing.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking of. So that might be for those listening, and also for you and Amy and the Mama Bears to look into that series, because there's a lot there, I think, with Rick Riordan's other books. So I'm not sure if he's supporting the progressive agenda. I don't know where he stands. I don't know enough about him, but anyways, there's some good examples there. So go ahead, Sarah. I'm sorry.
I think that was my question, the extent of my question. Yeah, and you kind of touched on one in the future too. So thank you for bringing up about, our particular mission here, with the power of stories. And I know we'll touch on that a little bit more later, but I know, Mike, your question's the next one.
Oh yeah. Okay. So I know, this is a big question, but there's so many other people we could talk about. So it could be, just the LGBTQ plus community, or we could talk about this community's view, but in general, what are some of the non-Christian trends and the understanding of sex, gender, and sexuality? I mean, I think you touched on the sexuality part a lot, and I think a lot of us are already exposed to that, but I hear a lot about the collapsing of those terms, sex and gender, that they're not kept distinct. And there's some messy science and philosophy here. So I don't know if you can talk about sort of the non-Christian understandings of those terms, the trends.
Yeah, so we saw this creep out of the postmodern movement. Again, it's this war on truth, and I think that's one thing we need to factor into is when it comes to sexuality, like it's not about sex. It's actually it's war with God, and so war with anything that can represent and mirror God. And we are made in God's image. We are the Imago Dei. So of course the battle is going to end up coming to us, and that's what we're seeing right now with sort of this disjunct between sex and gender. So again, it's out of the postmodern movement of war on truth, but we also see feminist influences as well. So Judith Butler was this very active feminist and everything. And what she noticed was that there were abuses that were going on based on gender. Again, women weren't getting career opportunities as much as men, or the pay was imbalanced. And so because of the abuse at the root of gender, she kind of formulated this idea that, okay, well, if we can get rid of gender, then we can get rid of the abuse. But the problem is that, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, I got a bit of a cold.
It's okay. Yeah.
The problem is that just doesn't work. You can't get rid of an abuse by getting rid of gender, because what is it going to do? It's just going to shift to something else. Mm-hmm. And so again, there's been this war against gender, because if we can get rid of the concept of male and female, then there's not going to be anything holding anyone back, right? Exactly. You can't have disproportionate pay and that sort. So that is where we're seeing, and that's what's kind of launched into the movement that we're seeing today, which is trying to place masculinity and femininity on a spectrum. And then what it does is it tells you what you are based on where you fall on the spectrum. Mm-hmm. The problem is that completely polarizes masculinity and femininity and puts it in very strict gender concepts. So, I mean, we have to first come up with, okay, what is man? I mean, is he a guy with a beard that wears plaid shirts and likes football? Okay, if that's the standard of masculinity, then, there's some people that are going to be kept out of that. What is a woman? I know. I see you got the beard. You make the cut. Yeah, so, yeah. What is a woman? Is she a delicate female who enjoys watching, her girly talk shows and baking cupcakes and that sort of thing? Okay, if we can now establish these strict gender constructs, then okay, where do you fall on that spectrum? And that's going to tell you where you lean. Mm-hmm. And so this can lead people to a complete existential crisis, because then who are they? If we're basing it on things like natural proclivities of things that we like doing, whether it's our hobbies, activities, or just different aspects of our personality and nature, this can be problematic, because again, we change. We're not the same people as we were when we were, 15 and 12. I mean, thank goodness, right?
Yeah.
We are so different, and that's where pointing back to when we look at what the Bible says about femininity, masculinity, it's wonderful, because there's such range within that. I mean, yes, you've got the manly men, you've got the Esau's out there, but you also have Jacob, who is hanging out with the ladies cooking. We often see David elevated as this great warrior and leader, but you know what? David started out hanging with sheep, playing on a harp. I mean, come on, you don't see too many guys playing harps nowadays. Same with women. You have wonderful women who are encouraging, and you've got the Tabithas out there, but you also have the Deborahs who are on the front lines of battle, encouraging the men. You've got Jael, who is, putting a tent spike through somebody's head. I mean, femininity, we got some bold chicks in the Bible, and this is fantastic. I think this is what we need to be presenting to our kiddos. And in a way that sort of debunks a lot of these arguments too, is when you actually look at masculinity and femininity, there's so much range within it that that you can be a soft-spoken, artistic male, and you are no less male than, you know, your football-loving counterparts.
Right.
Same with girls. Girls, you can be a dancer, you can love the girly things, or you can be that girl who is climbing up a tree and making mud balls. I mean, I was that girl, right? But I'm no less a female. And so that's why it's so important that we look at the whole person. And that's what's so problematic, is this whole split within sex and gender. It has these Cartesian influences. Nancy Pearcey touches on this a lot in her fantastic book, Love Thy Body, to where here we have this split between the biological and then the mental, the psychological, of who we are physically and who we perceive ourselves to be. And now with this shift in culture, biology is objective. I mean, you're male or female. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. But if we can bring it up into the mind, well, now we have this range that I think it's innumerable nowadays. I know they're saying there's up to 65 options, but honestly, I mean, if we now can construct sex and gender to be anything that we conceive it to be, the possibilities are infinite. And so, but this again breaks apart the body, and it pits one against the other, and that's so dangerous. I mean, and that's why the biblical worldview is so much better, because it nurtures the whole person, whereas the others does not.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up question? You know, reading Preston Sprinkle's book, I have a lot of questions. I haven't read Pearcey's Love Thy Body book, but I've read her other books. But one of the things that I might have misunderstood his argument, but he seemed to make the case that gender is completely culturally conditioned. And I disagree with that it does flow from sex, but also it kind of flows from God's design. So I would say there are cultural constructs, you know, the stereotypical man, stereotypical woman, to be sure, but I don't think I don't think it would be right for us to say it's completely cultural.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that route. I wouldn't say it's completely, because again, there are biological influences. Females by nature are typically more empathetic and compassionate. I mean, and you can see that in biology too. Men are typically more of the aggressive type, and that's why when you have a soft-spoken man that's kind of, oh, you know, he's kind of girly, or if you have a girl that's more assertive, is, you know, that's can sometimes be perceived as not very feminine. And so I would say that culture does shape this, but it isn't I wouldn't say it's completely culturally derived. So because there are still distinctions, and it's so funny, even when you think of like clothing, you know, I've seen the argument of, oh, you know, like skirts and things. I'm Scottish, right? So I grew up with a dad wearing a kilt, and and so, you know, people are trying to say, oh, see, you know, that's a different expression of femininity. And no, it's not. If you look at traditional Scottish attire, the men's kilts were very different from the female skirts. Even though they were in concept similar, they were still completely distinct. So so again, yes, there are some cultural influences, but do I think that it's just strictly cultural? I would say no. I would say that there's an influence of both. There's flexibility there.
Good. Okay. Yeah. That's, and I could have misunderstood what he was saying there, but that's how I kind of perceive it.
And I still have to read his book, but just on surface level of what you're describing, I'm more on the side of no, it's not strictly just cultural. There are cultural influences, but
of course. And I think he is pretty generous in saying that as well. So I have to kind of relook over that, but it just came to mind, so I figured I'd ask. Thank you for addressing that. The next question, what was another Sprinkle kind of inspired quote, just because it got me thinking, reading your book, reading his book, about pronoun hospitality, and whether, as an example of how, as parents, we can, you know, teach our kids how to treat those with whom we have significant disagreements or think differently than us, how we can be compassionate, but also stand up for what we believe in and not, I think you said earlier, you know, concede the gospel. So as one example of that, and then feel free to elaborate on more, do you have any take on pronoun hospitality? Should Christians use it if somebody requests it? Pros and cons of looking at this, I don't know how to approach it, but yeah.
Oh yeah, and it's a huge debate within the church and the apologetics community of what exactly should go about. In fact, just this weekend I was in Tennessee speaking at a church, and one of the moms had asked, okay, you know, what do I do? Because what if my little 8-year-old, because gosh, you know, I love kids, but tact is something that's learned, and 8-year-olds typically don't have a lot of it. You know, how do we navigate these issues? And I think what we need to encourage kids is to approach people and love people like Jesus first. So Jesus was only blunt and to the point with Christian leaders who should have known better. And so with everyone else, he met them where they're at. And so he was loving, he was compassionate. He didn't fly out the gate with, hey, let me tell you a list of all the things you're messing up, as so many Christian leaders in the past may have done. And that's why there's so many books on church hurts out right now. That's not the approach we're supposed to be taking. Our approach needs to be evangelistic first, to where we are meeting people and we are loving people and we are showing them the attractiveness and the beauty found only within the gospel, and the wholeness and the sanctification that can only be found in the gospel. That is our first goal. When it comes to kiddos, because this is a big thing, especially within schools now, there have been parents that have contacted us to where their young children in first grade, second grade will have classmates who some days come in as a boy, some days will come in as a girl, and they are floored on what to do. And Elisa Childers gave a great response at a conference that I just love. Is she said, if you're having convictions about how to address someone, address them by their name. Because if you address them by their name, you're meeting them where they're at. You're not shutting down any doors or windows that could possibly lead toward future ministry. Because a lot of people are very sensitive. Again, when you think of the LGBTQ ideology, who you identify as is the sum total of who you are. And so if you go at that right out the gate, a lot of people, they aren't even going to talk to you. You've just closed off a ministry opportunity. So rather than closing doors and staying true to your convictions, instead opt for and encourage your kiddos to use their names instead, because again, then you're not conceding anything. You're just calling them by their name of what they would like. And it's just a very easy way to navigate the situation, to be charitable, to be offering open doors for future ministry opportunities. Sorry for the screech. My kids just came home and our doors are very squeaky.
That's okay.
And this is just a great way to keep those doors open and allow for ministry. And it also lets your children be able to interact and show the love of Jesus with their classmates without putting them in sort of a precarious position as well. So because some little kids, they kind of go at evangelism a little bit like wielding a bat. Sometimes they can be very direct. And so this is just a great way to give kiddos a way to still love their classmates, minister to their classmates, sit next to them, and be able to dialogue with them without compromising conviction. Thinking
of Lucas a little bit, Sarah, there.
Yeah.
Well, we're already kind of training him up the way he should go. He's doing so well. And I'm laughing to myself because I can just imagine him saying, no, that's wrong,
He's 7 and he's definitely that tact, sometimes to just say whatever.
Oh my gosh. And that's just kids, right? I mean, you just have to navigate it. And, and there was a situation to where we were at Costco, and there was a gentleman who was probably about 65, but he dressed in a way that he was an 8-year-old girl. And it was very visually, it was surprising. And my kids were about, 6 and 4. So obviously, they're just going to run off. And so in situations like that, to where if kids aren't, you haven't really discussed these issues, it's totally okay to, nope, we're not going to engage that one right now, to where it gives parents that flexibility of, okay, we do want to be addressing these issues with our kiddos, but if you haven't got there yet, it's okay to kind of sidestep it for now, but don't let that always be the case. Sidestep it for now, but use it as an opportunity, as a reminder to be, okay, I need to engage with this, because if, once we leave the house, all bets are off.
No, absolutely.
Well, Sarah, you've got the last question. I know Amy's touched on a few art forms already, but I'll let you take it away and then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, and it fits in with the discussion you were having about masculinity and femininity. And I think in the book, I think it's Hillary talking about how she felt like she didn't fit into that kind of feminine category, right? I think I think that's something that all of us struggle with, of thinking like, I'm not feminine enough, I'm not masculine enough, when we have those strict definitions of what that is. And so you guys discussed in the book that movies are the new parables today, and you mentioned Pinocchio, and it's in the chapter about where you talk about Pinocchio. And so how are stories in general, movies, books, anything, stories, but movies in particular, because it's just what we're seeing, affecting our views of masculinity and femininity? Can you think of any particular movies that might promote more of the Christian worldview of masculine and femininity, or any that present more of an unbiblical? I know that there's like so many examples, but just can you touch a little bit about how what we're seeing in the media and in stories is affecting our views as masculinity and femininity?
Yeah, and you guys have probably recognized this just with your ministry itself, is recognizing that when it comes to literature, movies, entertainment in general, it's they're not just communicating a worldview, they're actively shaping it and shaping culture in the process. And so with that kind of, there's a bit of that artistic liberty to where they can not only reflect their own worldview, but put their own spin on it. And then in result, kind of shape culture in the process. And so we're kind of seeing that a bit when it comes to masculinity and femininity. I'm trying to think of some movies right now. So, I mean, of course you've got, like Mulan comes to mind, where here she was having to pass herself off as a boy to be able to fight and help save her country and spare her father from going on the battlefield when she was certain. I'm speaking of the animated Mulan, the newest one. I just wasn't too impressed with. I didn't think the story was that great. But gosh, I'm kind of running a blank on movies that are communicating these well, because again, you can have great discussions in any of these of to where you're looking at it, it's okay, thinking of that one. Here you've got a female warrior, and that wasn't supposed to be a woman's place, but are women capable of battle? Yes, they are. I'm a military, or I'm a veteran myself, so I kind of can speak to that. So so yes, I think what's important when we go and take our kids to the movies is that's a great time to leading up to it is to have these worldview questions and talk to the kids about it. And then afterward, in fact, Natasha Crane, I think it was her, she gave this great tip to where if you're going to take your kids to the movies, purposely pick a theater that's further away. So that way, when you drive back, you can actually discuss what you saw with your kids and have that longer point of time, because here you've got them in the car, they're trapped, right? And you can have these great discussions. That's one thing I noticed. You probably notice it with your kids. Like if you're in a car ride longer than 20 minutes, kids turn into philosophers. They're just like, oh my gosh, they start contemplating the big things of life. You know what? Confiscate the cell phones for a little bit. Discuss what they saw. How is femininity being portrayed? How is masculinity being portrayed? Sometimes within female characters, you will see the homemaker being sort of devalued, like, oh my gosh, look at how she just wasted her talents serving in the home. And it's no, being a homemaker has immense value, especially for the next generation. In fact, so many women now, because of COVID, are actually leaving the workforce. And what you won't see in news media is many of them are leaving the workforce because they realize that the home is so vital and important. They were missing out so much with their kids, and they wanted to be that present force. You won't see that in the media. The media will say, oh, well, they're not getting enough childcare support, or, there's undue pressure among females. And no, the homemaker is a valuable position that unfortunately, because of some of the aspects of third wave feminism, have kind of been devalued and even villainized to an extent. And so recognizing how these traits, masculinity and femininity, are being portrayed, how they are elevated and how they are villainized. So, okay, is a guy being villainized because he's super masculine, or is a girl being praised only when she acts masculine rather than if she is exhibiting more feminine traits? These are important things to point out, because then you could say, okay, what are they communicating by that? What are they saying about a female, or what are they saying about a male? Where is worth being derived? Is worth only derived if she is in the workforce? Is worth only being derived if he is being submissive and simpering to a female character? These are important things that we need to recognize, especially, and probably this is most easily done by just modern sitcoms. I mean, look at the way husband and wives are portrayed in modern sitcoms. The wife is always skinny, beautiful, and naggy, and the husband is always fat and dumb. And it's tragic, because here we have kids who are watching these sitcoms and are thinking, okay, this is what I can expect of marriage. And it's like, seriously? No, this is
terrible.
not marriage. It's tragic. And so I would encourage parents to use what the world is giving you to point them to Jesus, because they are giving you a wealth of information and not a lot of it is great. So instead, point out the worldview, show them what this is, and then show them not only within your own home and your own spouse. You guys, we all need to be that first model. We're our kids' first missionary that they will ever encounter. So we need to make sure we are doing our best to recognize and exhibit the gospel, the relationship between Christ and the church with our spouse. So that way our kids can grow up and say, okay, this is the type of marriage I want. It's one that's modeled after God, not one that's modeled after King of Queens.
Yes.
We were just, that's funny. That's a good example. We were just talking about that, Sarah. And I just thought of a great example. I had read The Wheel of Time, first book of The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. I'm not sure if you've heard of this.
Oh, you know what? That just came up, The Wheel of Time.
Yes.
And I haven't read it yet, but it just came on my radar. Somebody was talking about it.
You should, I mean, I encourage you to read the first book, especially read the first book if you can, and then watch the first 2 episodes of the Amazon series. And
That's right.
I'm a little rusty, but I told Sarah that I had to turn it off because first, I don't remember any explicitly gay characters in the book.
Right.
I actually read into the second book too. And they had already put several gay characters on screen, or at least two
Yeah.
I can think of. And then the main group, the Aes Sedai, which I love. I love this idea of a group of powerful women mages, and that's great. And again, that's a total Christ-like thing. But men, when they wield the magic of the universe, they can't handle it because they're men, and it's really pronounced, and they're corrupt. And you have to listen to the dialogue. I never remember it being that explicit in the book. And again, I'm rusty, so for those fans out there of Robert Jordan's books, of which there are 13 that Brandon Sanderson finished, that's a long story in and of itself, but it was so scathing and pronounced, and there's like almost these sneers on their faces when they're talking about men trying to wield power. And it's I thought of feminism, I thought of kind of just put down culture, and a lot of things kind of rushed into my mind as I was watching it, and I had to turn it off because I was just like, wow, this is not what I remember at all. So
it's so tragic. And the one thing that, we got to be aware of is because of how our culture is shifting right now, especially just among entertainment. I believe they made a new law to where to even be considered for awards, you have to have active LGBT characters and dialogue going on, to where it's one of these things to where it isn't going to get better. Like, and that's where we seriously need a revival of Christian arts, to where we can have Christian movie producers, art, cartoons, music. We really just need this resurgence of Christian presence within the arts, because here we're going to have a very contrary worldview, and our kids' cartoons are only going to get more explicit. They're only going to get more present. This isn't going to be just a June thing. This is constant. And I'm already seeing it in a lot of the stuff my kids are listening to. And the second they stop listening to, Disney movie soundtracks, all of the music that's coming out now are coming from a sex positive perspective, to where, like you were saying, like when you think of like Cardi B and Beyonce, it's all this whole, men are holding us back, or we need to be sexually vulgar in our songs because that's how we demonstrate confidence. In fact, that was the commentary on the song WAP. One of the producers has said, men can talk about whatever they want and they're just called as confident. And so we ladies, we need to be confident, and not realizing, wait a second, what you're defining as confidence is degrading not only to women, but to men. But they're not realizing it, because again, it's culturally popular.
Thank you.
And so it's just something that we need to recognize, that culture nowadays, to include toys, media, clothing, all of this stuff. If they're a children's program, don't think that they have your children's best interest at heart. They don't. They're coming from a secular worldview. Their goal is the bottom line. And in fact, the LOL surprise dolls, that one mom, when she dunked in the cold water, realized that they had leather straps and looked like they were extras on a 50 Shades of Grey movie. When the company was approached of why would you do this? Why would you make and they were little toddler baby dolls dressed this way? They said, well, it's what's popular. And it's like, okay, they don't realize that they're actively shaping culture in the process. They're just saying, oh, well, we're just meeting supply and demand. And because we parents have been so desensitized, we don't realize it. But I mean, parents, let me encourage you, go walk down that pink aisle at Target or Walmart and look at the dolls that are geared toward children older than 5 years old. And they all look like they know which hotels charge by the hourly rate. And these are the models of femininity and beauty that we are preaching to our girls, which girls are listening. They are recognizing that this is, which we cover in the book, that this is what beauty is. And boys throughout their video games and entertainment, they're saying, oh, the scantily clad, sexually aggressive female is what you should expect in a female. So now you have the girls being groomed to be this play toy of a male, and the males are being groomed to say, no, this is what your standard should be for beauty, sexuality, and attraction. And it just fuels this cycle of brokenness. So the best thing we could do to raise countercultural kids is to raise kids that think well, to recognize the worldview that's out there, recognize the brokenness of it, and see how beauty and restoration can be found only in Christ.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to clap at this point for you.
Standing ovation.
That this was like a real bracing tonic to hear this, and for us too, because it's convicted us in a lot of things that we need to do better in, but also inspired us to keep doing what we're doing, Sarah. I mean, I'm
absolutely
ready to...
No, I'm just was thinking about, that you guys talk about it in your first book, Mama Bear Apologetics, about the chew and spit method. And because you can't avoid these things, they're going to pop up in everything. And also mentioning that we need this Christian resurgence in the arts, and that don't portray Christians like you were mentioning, when your son was joking about how Christians are portrayed. so between needing that and what we have, we've got to have that chew and spit method where we're taking what we can from it and spitting out the things and being able to have those conversations with our children to teach them how to discern as well, because they're eventually going to be on their own, and you want them to have the tools they need when they're older and you're not there all the time. To be able to manage what they're receiving, because there's so much
stimulation
that we're getting, so much stimulation these days with internet access to just constant droves of information all the time. So,
and what's so great is kids are really good at this, and from a very young age. So we would do it to where we would watch a show, and if something questionable came up, we would just pause it and be like, okay, what's going to happen? What are these choices? What are these decisions actually saying, and what they believe? And then we'd hit play and see how it would play out. And then we say, okay, well, what would you do in this situation? What does the Bible say to this? How does it speak to this? And it's so great because you don't have to do that long for your kids to pick this up. Right. And it's awesome now because there are so many times where I'll be cooking dinner and my kids will be, watching a show, and they'll pause it and they'll go, Mom, come here. And so they'll drag me in there and they'll be like, okay, watch. And then they'll hit play and they'll be like, did you catch it? And it's so cool because here you have these kids who are recognizing it, and they're super little, and kids they can pick up on these things. And that's our goal, right? Is to help them in a way. Because we got the new Matrix movie coming out, right? Which I'm super excited about. It's like, you're helping them see the Matrix. They're recognizing it now to where you don't have, as this psychologist was praising, you don't have these mindless consumers. Instead, you have these kids who are actually evaluating the truth claims, because they are, each and everything, they're making truth claims. They're making worldview claims. And if you help your kids see it, then they can recognize and discern it. It doesn't make them impervious to bad decision making. I mean, we've all got free will. We all mess up, but it does help them understand what's going on, and you can have fruitful discussions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know we had a mom was tuning in and asking some more, I think more making some statements that she did say, and I know that this is a concern not only for my mom, but for many who didn't grow up hearing about worldviews, that there's confusion about learning where do I start, learning about worldviews. And sorry, I just got a note that our internet connection was unstable. Am I still there?
I was frozen.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm here. So one tip for those of you that are listening, Mom and others, there's a great book. There's so many great books, but The Universe Next Door by James W. Sire. There's an updated edition, is one of the finest out there. Very good. But also this book is going to give you a great introduction to the concept of worldviews and also understanding the Christian worldview. So obviously we want to encourage you to get the Mama Bear Guide to Sexuality, because that's going to help you understand, Mom, especially for you and other Christians listening, what we believe. But then that other book is great for learning about what others believe. So we have to do the hard work. I also had a former student tune in and said, we should have got you for our class discussion recently. So sorry, Jacob, that we didn't do that. But thanks for tuning in. So that was great.
Maybe next time, Jacob.
Yeah,
that's right.
Can I chip in another good resource?
Of course,
worldview?
Please.
Okay, so this is another great one. It's by a gal that we love. Her name's Elizabeth Urbanowitz. She wrote a curriculum. She's a former private school teacher, and she actually wrote a curriculum called Foundation Worldview. So if you just put that in your Google search, I think it's foundationworldview.com. It might be .org. But anyway, she writes this great curriculum that if you're homeschool, you can implement it. Even if you're public school, I would say get this curriculum, because you can do it with your kids, and it helps them to think well, to recognize logical arguments. I mean, this is just fantastic thinking exercises, because, as the professor in Narnia bemoaned, don't they teach logic in schools anymore? No, they don't. And you want your kids to be logical, because if they're logical, they're going to be less likely to be manipulated by emotion, which is what social media and our current culture wants. They want you to react emotionally, because then you can easily be steered to whatever is the latest outrage. And we don't want our kids to be led that way. They need to think critically. So that's another really great resource that I can point you to, that for younger kids, even to middle school, high school, that's a fantastic resource to help them to think well.
I'm glad you mentioned that. We actually purchased her one for the early childhood for I think.
Oh, awesome.
And did that with our kids. We mentioned, I think we shouted her out on Facebook, like, we want more, because our kids really took to it. And so we're definitely looking forward to, as they get older, to doing more of her curriculum, especially like you said, you can do it with public school too, because, our kids are in public school, but being able to give them what they need at home too, it's great.
Yep.
Hurrah.
Yeah, we have to check on that. I don't know if she has released new material from where we last left off, but
she does. She just finished writing one. I don't know if it's been released yet, but this one's on Logic. So, I
Ooh,
mean,
no, we didn't do that
yeah,
one, so we'll look
yeah.
for it.
So it's coming. It's coming. So I'm super
Awesome.
excited for it.
Great. Yeah, we join you in celebrating that. She does great work.
Cheers.
And so have you. Thank you so much, Amy,
Yeah.
for repping for Hillary and yourself and writing this just truly readable and helpful book and galvanizing book that I think will give Christians a lot of courage. So where can we find it? I mean, is there any other resources you want to let us know about, and where to buy your book that would help the ministry the most?
Oh, you know what? Anywhere you can buy the book is helpful. I think we're even listed on Target. But
Oh.
Christian books, we always want to support our Christian retailers, right? So christianbooks.com is a great place to go. A while ago, they had it, I want to say, for half off. So so I know, right? If you can get over the fact that it probably won't be a 2-day delivery like Prime does, the half off, that's good savings. Christian books, you can get us on Amazon. Again, Target, we're also available at. So pretty much anywhere books are sold, you should be able to find us. And so our first book is even available in your local Hobby Lobby. Our second book, I don't think has reached there or is released there yet. So, but anyways, you can all the favorite book shopping places. It makes a great stocking stuffer. And like you said, when you said mamas and papas, this isn't just meant for the moms.
Yeah.
It's meant for the dads. It's meant for the grandmas, the grandpas. If you are ministering to kids and teens in any form, this book is for you because it's hitting your kids, it's hitting you, and it's there to help empower you.
Yeah. And both books are fantastic. I've read them both, and they're really just wonderful resources. Very readable, like you said, Mike. Very readable. Very. It just feels like we're having a conversation as you're reading the book, and so it's wonderful.
Yeah. We're very grateful, and I know Sarah was very excited, and so was I. And thank you for emphasizing that this is for dads as well.
Absolutely.
And nonas and papas out there. I hope you're listening. Yeah, all the grandparent names that we come up with. So. Yes, again, thank you so much, Amy, for joining us. I guess that will be the end of our show today. We'll see you next time.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.